All right, greetings everyone. I'm Eric Feil of Richner Communications, and I am thrilled to welcome you all here today to today's Herald Inside LI webinar, produced by Richner Live and sponsored by Family Care Connections LLC. Today, it's all about Medicaid eligibility, changes in qualification rules, what to do with extra assets. Of course, we're going to touch on a lot more than those topics. We have an incredible panel of experts here to share their knowledge, their expertise, their passion for all of this from Family Care Connections LLC. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Frank D'Angelo, Director of Medicaid, Medicare, and Eldercare Services, and Dr. Anne Marie D'Angelo, Doctor of Nursing Practice and Director of Clinical Services. Welcome and thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Eric. It's a pleasure, and we thank you for inviting us.
This is such an incredibly important topic. I'm thrilled to really, have you and share all your knowledge, answer questions that have come in from the hundreds of people in our audience today. But first, if you give us a little background about yourself, how you got involved in this field, and then the passion, the mission, the services of Family Care Connections.
Sure. I've been in this field for well over 30 years. I practiced elder law for over 30 years, and now my wife and I run this company, Family Care Connections LLC, which concentrates on elder care consulting, nurse geriatric care management, Medicaid planning, and housing options for aging. We help people really navigate through this very complex system, and we help them to decide what's the best place for them to receive the care, how they pay for the care, and then we help troubleshoot the problems at the accounting and accessing the care.
I think when you talk about the term navigation and complexity, I mean, those are two words that I think anyone who has even considered or looked at the notion of elder care, of Medicaid, of how they start the process and where they go. And there are so many terms to know. It's interesting in speaking with people as we come up to this webinar, we'll hear people say, oh, Medicaid, Medicare, whatever it is I have. And I said, well, that's why you've got to come watch, because there are big differences. There are big things you need to know. So if we could start out, Medicaid itself, if you could just give our audience sort of the overview. What is it? What is the intention for it? What is its role for people?
So Medicaid is a medical program, a health insurance program that is really initially designed to help people meet their healthcare needs if they don't have Medicare, if they don't have private health insurance, and they're not able to pay for the care themselves. So it's a program where you have to have limited assets and limited income to qualify. But there are very liberal laws that allow people who are middle class and even upper middle class who might be experiencing catastrophic health illnesses to qualify for Medicaid. And the real motivation behind this in the context of chronic long-term care management is that Medicare does not pay for an unlimited amount of custodial care and chronic long-term care or nursing home care. So people are forced to look at other options to pay for that care when their loved one experiences that kind of illness, whether it be in a nursing home or at home receiving home care services. So Medicaid provides that coverage, but it requires careful planning in order to qualify. And as you said, there's a great deal of misinformation out there about how you qualify, what the rules and regulations are, and what some of the exceptions are with respect to how much assets you can have and who can hold them for you.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great point you raised so early here in our discussion, is that because of the catastrophic illnesses and the cost of this long-term care, it really does help a wide swath of people from various economic levels. So again, as we talk more about the assets, will really help address all of those. You also talked about home care, and there are not just one type of Medicaid, correct? There's, which I think can cause some confusion for people out there. There's community Medicaid, home care Medicaid, assisted living Medicaid, and then there's nursing home Medicaid. Could you sort of explain the difference among these?
Sure. So obviously nursing home Medicaid is a program designed to help provide for care when a person is in a long-term care facility. And there are specific rules about how a person qualifies for that type of Medicaid. Specifically, there are longer look-back periods on transfers of assets. So just a quick crash course. People who want to qualify for Medicaid can't have more than $15,900 in their resource in their bank accounts. So you say to yourself, well, what do you do when a person has more than $15,900? So the answer is you either spend down to that point or you transfer your assets out. Now, if you transfer your assets to a spouse, that's called an exempt transfer. There's no penalty for that kind of transfer. So it's important people understand if they're in a situation where their spouse is ill, there's a possibility that they could do planning where they could transfer their assets and qualify for nursing home Medicaid. So that's one option. Another option is, obviously, as we said before, you transfer your assets to someone other than a spouse. And to qualify for nursing home Medicaid, there's a 5-year look back when you do that, or a 5-year penalty. So when you do that kind of plan, you have to be mindful of the reality that you either do it far enough in advance, or you do it in a way where you have the ability to pay for the 5 years of coverage in a nursing home, which can be quite expensive. It can be as much as $15,000 a month. Now, there are ways, if you consult with experts, attorneys and eldercare practitioners who are familiar with this area, there are ways for you to protect your assets if you have more than $15,900 and you're faced with the immediacy of a nursing home stay, to protect your assets up to about a half using what's called promissory notes or transfers of assets with trusts and other kinds of vehicles. That's very specialized planning that would go beyond the scope of our discussion today, because we could spend an entire morning just talking about that alone. But I just want the viewers to be aware of those options and that they should consult with an expert who is familiar with that kind of planning. So that's how the nursing home aspect of this works out. Home care Medicaid obviously is a Medicaid program where you receive care, home health care in your home. The rules are more liberal with respect to transferring assets in that type of situation. You still can only have $15,900, but right now, if you transfer your assets, you can qualify for Medicaid at home immediately. What's happening on the horizon and why consumers should be mindful is that New York is in the process of implementing rules that will govern a 30-month look back on transfers of assets for people who want to qualify for home care Medicaid. However, there is a delay, primarily because of COVID-19. There is a delay in implementing those rules. They won't be implemented until at least January of next year. And a lot of the insiders are saying that it might be April or even July of next year before they actually implement the 30-month look back. But people want to be aware that if you're thinking about home care Medicaid, that is receiving home health services under the Medicaid program, it is possible to qualify right now by transferring your assets out, and there's no penalty period. There will be a penalty period imposed at sometime at the beginning or the middle of next year.
So it's funny, as you're talking there, and again, a lot of the terminology that people need to learn and to start to understand, because one of the biggest challenges, obviously, as you said, in Medicaid planning rather, is preserving parts of your estate, protecting your assets and having something there. And there are terminology that you need to know. For example, you said it, the look back. I mean, it sounds like a Netflix show. It really is something that people talk about. And if you could explain really what is a quote unquote look back or penalty period, some people call it, what it really means and how that works.
Sure. So very good question. I think the best way to understand the look back is from an IRS point of view, it's an audit period. So what happens is when you apply for Medicaid, Medicaid wants to see what you've done with your assets for a period of time up to the time you're applying for Medicaid, because they don't want people who have large amounts of assets to illegally transfer their assets. They want it to be done in a legal way in accordance with the Medicaid guidelines. So when you transfer your assets, Medicaid will audit what you've done. In the case of a nursing home application, as I said before, up to 60 months. And in the case of a home care application right now, no audit period, but there will be a 30-month look back imposed later on where they want to see, who did you transfer your assets to? Did you spend the money down on your care? Did you make charitable transfers? Did you transfer to a disabled child? Because there are certain exceptions to this rule. As I said to you before, you can transfer to a spouse, you can transfer to a disabled child, and those types of transfers will not result in a penalty. But when you transfer your assets during the look-back period or the audit period, Medicaid will impose a period of ineligibility for assets transferred to someone who's not exempt or who doesn't fall into one of these exceptions, and they'll impose a time where you will not be considered eligible for the medical assistance program. That's a complex formula again, and if people are thinking of doing that kind of planning, I would urge them to seek out professional consultation from an expert, an eldercare expert, elder law attorney or eldercare consulting expert who can really fully explain to them the consequences within the parameters of their particular circumstance. And again, with respect to the home, because many people, their primary asset or their most valuable asset is their home, there are particular rules that allow you to transfer your home to certain individuals who are intended to be protected. Again, a spouse. If you transfer your home to a spouse, it's an exempt transfer. If you transfer your home to a disabled child, it's an exempt transfer. If you transfer your home to a child who's not disabled, who's been your caregiver for at least 2 years, that's an exempt transfer. If you transfer your home to an adult sibling who has an equity interest in your house for at least 1 year, that can be an exempt transfer. So there are certain transfers that are exempt, but to answer your initial question, during this audit period, the general rule is if you've transferred assets, you may be subject to some period of ineligibility, and that is determined by this complex formula.
Exactly, because the idea of transfer on the surface seems simple. Oh, I have a house, I have X amount of money in the bank, I have X amount of stocks, I'll just give it to my kids and I'll walk away and I'll be fine. But it is not that simple. And there are some things that people can set up and work with. Again, it goes to your point of planning, speaking with financial experts. But if we could talk a little bit about, because I heard the term spend down, and the idea also, one thing that people really look at is a pooled income trust. If you could talk a little bit about what these are and how they can help with the proper planning, help take someone's assets and not lose them. You hear people will say, oh my goodness, if I apply for Medicaid, I'm going to lose everything and everything's going to go. And that is not necessarily the case if it is planned correctly.
Correct. Okay, so the spend down really is, the quick and easy approach to that is you spend your assets on your care, and then when you've exhausted your assets, you can apply when you're down to that $15,900, or you can transfer out to the designated exempt individuals or to a trust, as we discussed before. The pooled trust really deals with the income side of this equation. So in addition to not having more than $15,900, individuals who want to qualify for Medicaid can't have more than $904 a month of income. So if their income exceeds $904 a month, they are in a situation where they have excess income. And you either, again, have to spend down the income, the overage, the amount above $904 on medically related expenses, or you have to go into what's called a pooled income trust. A pooled income trust is a trust that's set up through a not-for-profit, a designated not-for-profit company, and you designate what your monthly expenses are that are not medically related, and the excess income that a person has above the $904 goes into this pooled trust. And then the trust manager pays the bills on the household, and this allows a person who has excess income above $904, to qualify for home care, Medicaid, or community Medicaid. Now, obviously, on the nursing home side of this equation, the pooled trust issue is really a non-issue, because when a person enters a nursing home, they will turn over all of their income to the nursing home, except for a $50 a month personal needs allowance. So there's no income spend down. The only way that changes is if there's a spouse involved. So if there's a community spouse involved in a situation where a spouse goes into a nursing home, the community spouse will be able to keep up to $3,259 a month in 2021. And people should be aware that these numbers are changed annually, and they usually change in January. So the numbers that we're using now are 2021 numbers. It's likely that they'll be adjusted at the beginning of the new year. But $3,259.60 is what the community spouse is allowed to keep in the situation involving a nursing home placement. But generally speaking, with the pooled trust, we're dealing with home care or community Medicaid applications, and we're trying to preserve the excess income, the amount of income above the allowable $904 that is not medically related expense. Okay.
And the community spouse is the spouse who does not need Medicaid. And again, in a lot of cases, particularly as people get older, there is one spouse who's going to need to apply for it and the other one doesn't. But there can be a situation, say, where the wife is collecting a pension, and if the husband is going to be the community spouse, where does that pension go? Where does the Social Security go? How does that income get managed? And how does the community spouse still maintain a level of living in the community that they were used to?
Right, very good point. Yeah, so the idea behind the community spouse is that the person that remains at home, that doesn't go into the nursing home, is referred to as the community spouse. And Congress intended to create a situation where community spouses were not impoverished. They didn't find themselves in a situation where they were left destitute in the community. You know, in the typical scenario, traditionally, although that's changing now, because both husband and wife oftentimes are working and have their own income sources, but traditionally it was a man who might have the larger Social Security or the pension, and if he went into a nursing home, all of his income would go towards the nursing home. So Congress created a situation where the community spouse would not be impoverished, and they determined that a certain portion of the non-institutionalized spouse's income could remain with the community spouse to prevent that impoverishment situation. And that's how that works. So if the nursing home spouse really has most of the income, they can still assign it over, or will be counted as belonging to the community spouse, even though the person might be on Medicaid.
Can we talk a little bit about the timing of this? And timing is obviously always perfect in retrospect, but I think very often someone feels good, everything's going well, an older couple, they're living at home, everything feels fine. And then all of a sudden, very quickly, one or more conditions for someone can start to deteriorate. And it'd be like, wow, I might not need Medicaid in 5 or 6 years. I might need it in 5 or 6 months. And how does all of this asset translation, if the house, for example, is in both spouses' name or one spouse's name, getting it over to the other, what is sort of the timing and the quote unquote speed or lack of that really needs to be taken into consideration for all of that?
Right. So ideally, you want to do this kind of planning far enough in advance so you're not dealing in crisis mode. So if you're thinking about that time frame, maybe you want to do this at least 5 or 6 years ahead of time. You know, as you start to approach retirement age, you may want to sit down and have that conversation between couples or with other family members or other professionals, trusted professionals, to see what kind of plan you could put together that is global, not just for Medicaid planning, but also to make sure you have the proper legal documents drafted to pay for bills, to make healthcare decisions, to make sure your assets go to your intended beneficiaries in the event of death. So that would be a part of a global discussion. And as I said, ideally that should be done far enough in advance so you're not dealing in crisis mode. But if you have not done that and you're dealing with the situation as you described, where it's, you know, a person is immediately ill and it's likely that they may need this care in the next few months, or they might already need it. You know, oftentimes people come in and they already have a spouse in the hospital, you know, and it looks like they're going to a nursing home. So in that situation, again, we have the spousal transfer rule, right? So you have the ability to transfer assets from one spouse to another without having to worry about the 60-month look back or the 30-month look back. You could make transfers without penalty, and that's also going to help with respect to the planning. So you you do that kind of planning in that context with the idea that you have to make a spousal transfer. Now, what if you're in a situation where you don't have a spouse? Well, then, all the more reason why you want to try and do the planning far enough in advance. Fortunately, again, we still have the ability to transfer assets without penalty for home care. So the first line of approach might be to say, can this person go back to their home and get the care at home, and apply for home care services? That would be ideal. But as Anne Marie will talk about in the second half, there are limitations with respect to how many hours you can get. There are challenges in terms of getting the proper amounts of hours. So there's a whole other list of challenges that you'll encounter once you get on Medicaid. But at least from the eligibility point of view, to get on Medicaid at home would help you if you're dealing with the immediacy of an illness where you haven't done the planning far enough in advance and you look like you might be subject to penalty restrictions.
Yeah, exactly. As far as that, the scope of home care services and what's some of these, how is that determined in the eligibility and application process? I mean, if a person has one condition, one type of illness, or two or three, is it one application and then that gets determined later? How does that process work and who makes that determination?
Okay, so Anne Marie's going to go into more detail about the access to the services, once eligibility is established. So to answer your question with respect to eligibility, there's no difference in terms of the application process. You have to first establish eligibility. So you're either applying for home care Medicaid or you're applying for nursing home Medicaid, and that's the eligibility phase. They're looking totally at your financial exposure, your financial portfolio to see what assets you have, what income you have, et cetera, and you establish Medicaid eligibility. Once you're at the second phase of this, where you're now looking to get the services, well, again, obviously, if you're in a nursing home, the nursing home is going to cover the services. It's really not so much a challenge to make sure you get the proper amounts of service. That's really more of a, making sure you get the quality, the adequacy of the service in a particular facility. But home care, there is a whole process you go through, and there's a series of evaluations that you have to go through. And Anne Marie will describe those in detail and what the challenges are when she talks about the access to the clinical services. But I think it's important for consumers to understand in the first phase of this, you have to establish eligibility. And the eligibility is all financial in the first phase.
And then talking about planning, so if there is a situation where there are spouses and one spouse is a community spouse, that community spouse may not stay a community spouse forever. So if assets have been transferred, what can be done and what should that person then do to protect themselves and plan for their own eventuality if they need to come down that pike? Because they won't have a spouse to transfer things to.
Correct. So the biggest challenge and the best piece of advice with respect to this, again, is you should do the planning far enough in advance so you're not going to be worrying about the look back periods. So you can do spousal transfers if there's an emergency. And then once those transfers are made, then you look to do the planning, the legal planning and the financial planning, the Medicaid planning for the community spouse so that that person, if they become ill, you can protect as much of the assets as possible. And also you can set up a plan to assure that they get the proper care in the proper setting. So obviously that will change from situation to situation and based on people's individual preferences and goals with respect to how they want their estate to be distributed. Some people, that we've talked to over the years might say, well, I worked for the money, I earned the money. At the end of the day, if I spend the money on my care, that's fine with me. And whatever's left over, it'll go to my designated beneficiaries. And that's usually the easiest kind of planning, right? But if people have specific ideas about where they want their estate to go, they want to preserve their assets, they want to take advantage of the benefits that they're entitled to under these programs like Medicare and Medicaid, they should be able to do that kind of planning. But in order to do that, in order to take control of that kind of situation, they need to address it seriously far enough in advance. So they put a global plan together. And the global plan will be ways of protecting assets and also ways to make sure that someone else can step in and access and manage their finances and make healthcare decisions for them if they're not able to do it themselves. And that's a big challenge for a lot of people, to put themselves in a situation where they say, oh, maybe 5 years down the road, I'm not going to have the capability of making decisions. People have struggles like that on all different levels. Maybe I won't be able to drive my car in the near future. And what will happen then? Who will get me around? How will I travel around? And it's a whole crisis of independence and self-determination that's part of this planning that people have to enter into in order to do it adequately.
Absolutely. And there are so many layers and levels of connection that I think until people really do get into the planning process and see the connection I mean, it's a great point about if someone can't drive, how do they get the care? Who helps them get to a financial planner's office even, or that? So again, the obvious idea of planning ahead, planning early is particularly important here.
Yes, and people oftentimes, unless they've experienced it on some level within their family, they've been a caregiver themselves, or they're professionals in the field, it's very hard for them to envision themselves being in that vulnerable position. But it really is the most effective way to adequately deal with this kind of planning, is to kind of step out of this sense of where you're invincible and you'll be able to do what you've been doing forever, and say to yourself, maybe in the next few years, maybe sooner, I may not be able to do a lot of things. So let me start getting my affairs in order. Let me start to think about who can do these jobs for me, because that's a whole other level of family analysis and introspection. Who has the capability and the time to do these things, which will oftentimes require a lot of time, attention, and resources.
That's exactly right. And you talk about family, and I've gone through this myself, and I happen to have a large family. There are plenty of spouses and siblings and grandkids, everybody who can sort of help out. But how would you recommend, what kind of team or what sort of resources do people need who don't have that, who don't have the immediate family who's either able, willing, what have you, to get involved and help with this planning process, particularly in a crisis mode where it is all hands on deck?
Right. So I think that they should find, to begin with, a trusted team, a team that might consist of a financial advisor, an attorney, an accountant, a care management team, a team of people like the people at Family Care Connections, where there's someone with a medical background and nursing background can really adequately address the person's limitations and what the trajectory will be, depending on the person's diagnosis and limitations, what their trajectory is likely to be, so they can plan adequately for what's coming down the road. So it would be a team of professionals who can help with the financial issues, the legal issues, the healthcare management issues, the asset preservation issues, and then also the support, the emotional support issues that come out of this, the stress of dealing with an illness, dealing with the changing lifestyle, to deal with the reality that we're all mortal and that our lives come to an end, and to put our affairs in order. So all these issues need to be addressed. And you start with your immediate family, and ideally you have a good conversation with them. And then you begin to look to see who can you work with out in the community professionally who can make sure that these issues are adequately met.
Exactly. Again, it's all about communication, that really, and finding someone who is trusted. And one more question before we get over to Anne Marie is, we're talking here about getting a trusted team, everybody working together to do this, but I've heard this term spousal refusal. What is that in terms of this whole process?
Okay, so if you remember before, at the very beginning, we talked about the financial eligibility issues, and we said you can't have more than $904 of income, you can't have more than $15,900 in resources, and you can transfer your assets to your spouse. Now, what happens is, if your spouse has a large amount of money, and remember, we also said you can transfer, even if you have excess resources of your own, you could transfer them to your spouse. So New York has a very specific and helpful law that says if you transfer your assets to your spouse, there's no penalty. And then in addition, your spouse can refuse to make their assets and income available for the purposes of qualifying for Medicaid, okay? So that the typical scenario would be you transfer a sum of money over that $15,900 to your spouse. Could be $1,000, could be tens of thousands of dollars, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. You transfer that money to the spouse, presumably to make sure that that spouse is taken care of, because the unwell spouse has other issues now. And then that spouse can say, I'm not able to make my resources available to my spouse for the purposes of eligibility. And so the person who is applying for Medicaid can still get the Medicaid services, even though their spouse has large amounts of assets in their name. Now, the thing is that you need to also be mindful of that, the reality that there are other laws in New York that make set up requirements for people to contribute or support their spouses. So it is possible that if an individual has a very large amount of assets in their name and they do a spousal refusal, their spouse, their unwell spouse, will still qualify for Medicaid, but maybe the Department of Social Services or the Medicaid program will come forward and say, wait a second, you have an inordinate amount of assets. We want you to contribute something towards your spouse. Traditionally, that's been something that that the Medicaid program, the Department of Social Services, has done sporadically. And the policy varies depending on the economy, who's in control of the administration of these programs. But people should be aware of the two parts to this spousal refusal component. That is, spouses can refuse to make their assets available and their income available, and their unwell spouse can qualify for Medicaid. But also they may be in a situation where they might be asked to contribute some portion of those assets to the unwell spouse's needs. That's always a negotiable piece of this whole process.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, Frank. So I think now is a great moment to start to talk about the idea of the access to care, the type of care, and how we know what our patient's going to get. So we will welcome to the seat Anne-Marie. How are you today?
Very good. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. That was incredibly informative half of our program, right? I mean, so much to know and so many questions that still to be asked, and it's great to know that there are resources out there, because one question sort of begets another throughout this whole process.
That's right.
So if you could please give our audience a little bit about your background, how you came to work in this field, and again, the passion, the resources you want to bring to people, and really how you want to help. That's what you're all about.
So I have been a nurse for many, many decades now. I have been focusing in on geriatrics, working with the elderly and their families, and psychiatric issues for the past 30 years, I'd say. I've worked on psychiatric units, I've worked in geriatric facilities, and I've worked in home care. I help people and have been really brought into this more and more by the patients and the families themselves to really focus in on how to get them the best help in the community. And if not that, then what is the next best step? And so I like to look at and focus in on what is important for this individual and their family, because we come as a unit and families are so deeply affected by their loved ones. And the loved ones are so deeply affected by their families. And as you had pointed out before, illnesses create problems for families that they often don't understand. They don't know what to expect immediately. And then, of course, as things change for them in the future. We all change as we age, don't we, Eric?
I think I've changed since we started our talk here today. That's without a doubt.
So we know that just normal aging affects us. How much more difficult is it than when we put on top of that the medical issues that come about?
Absolutely. And I think, the first question and topic I'd love to address is exactly that, and going to something that Frank even touched upon, is this it can come on the need very quickly. And there's that sense of self and being able to look at yourself, say, okay, I might need to address my own mortality, the fact that I'm not likely getting healthier as time goes by, and that I might need help from friends, family, finding experts. How do you recommend families can help elder family members, parents, grandparents, sort of come to that? I feel like that's the first step. The first step is sort of saying, okay, we need to plan and look and address this.
Yes, and that's so important. And it's so difficult for all of us to look at those issues more closely and be realistic about them. I can't tell you how often I've found people who are in their 90s even saying, oh, no, I'm not that old yet. Oh, no, I'm really okay. It's very difficult. So families are often up against a situation where that family member may not really be ready to talk about those things. But I really prefer and try to encourage them to talk before something happens, because something is going to happen. That's the reality in life, right? We are going to change. Nothing ever stays the same. So the changes are going to come, and they're typically not going to be positive. So how are we going to deal with that and move forward through it and identify it and say, what do we want? So when families say, I want to stay home no matter what, that's it. That's what I want to do. And I
Yep.
appreciate that. That's why I'm in community care. However, we have to look closely at what that really means. And we have to talk about how we really want to handle that, because staying home no matter what, if you have an emergent situation where you have to go to a hospital because we can't take care of that at home, not immediately. We have to get that person stabilized first. We can't keep you at home at that moment. And then what's the next best step? Is it going right back home? Is it going to a rehab facility where they can get much more intensive care than if they go home? Keep in mind that therapy is covered through Medicare, right? These are Medicare issues. So Medicare covers therapy in a rehab facility in full the first 20 days. 21 through 100, they cover 80%. And if you have a secondary, which I always encourage people to do, get a secondary policy, day 21 through 100 is covered by that secondary. At home, now let me just be clear about PT too. PT and OT and speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy are given in a rehab facility by professional staff. There are also 24/7 care by aides and overseen by nursing staff. There is medical care available as well. There's a dietitian who also helps to make sure that the diet is right. So there's a lot of different professionals that can help out. At home, that's not true, right? So even though we want very much to keep that person at home and maybe even do rehab at home, oh, and let me go back, I'm sorry, one more second. PT in a facility is at least 6 days a week, 5 to 6 days a week. At home, it's typically 2 days a week. So that really decreases the amount of help they're going to get from a therapist. There's also more difficulty accessing those services at home. So you might be able to get OT, occupational therapy at home, physical therapy at home, and speech therapy at home because Medicare will cover it, but we have to have those professionals available to go out and see that person. So that also, how we have to consider that. So it depends on what is that medical problem, or the multiple medical problems, the complex problems that are there, and what's the best way to deal with it. And where's the best place to go to get that help? Because all rehab, although it's all being paid by Medicare, and Medicare has an expectation level for what's provided, all facilities are not equal, right? There are cultural differences. I teach nursing, and what I tell my nursing students is, even in the same hospital, there are cultural differences in the different floors that you're on. So we have to remember that. We have to remember what our comfort level is going to be, what our family's comfort level is going to be, and what we need. What do we need to get out of this, so that we can hopefully at the end of the rehab be at home, be safe, and access the care that we need. And that's part of why we're talking about Medicaid, isn't it? Because accessing care is really helpful through Medicaid. Medicare, as Frank said, short-term care, 2 to 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks if you're lucky. They're cutting back. I used to be able to get much more help for people at home than I can now. Whereas Medicaid is long-term care services. So we really need that. The problem is that Medicaid is changing. So those changes, we don't have them. We're still in the process of seeing them and what they're going to be exactly. But we do know that once you get accepted for Medicaid, and I hope it's okay, jump right into this, Eric.
Of course, please.
Once you get accepted for Medicaid, then you get a package. And that package says you have to get an assessment if you want home care. And that assessment is typically done by a Maximus, it's called. It's a universal assessment that's done. A nurse will come to the house and do that assessment. It's up to 3 hours long. And it really is at least 2.5 hours because it is such an involved assessment. And Eric, it is so important that that assessment is done and where the information is given correctly. Cannot tell you how lately I've been hearing people say, well, the UAS, the universal assessment, says one thing, and now this new assessment, it says something else, and that's a problem. That creates a lot of problems. So we want to start off right from the beginning. Let's make sure we understand what it is they're looking for in that universal assessment. And what they're looking for is activities of daily living. How is this person functioning at home? How much help do they really need? There are people with dementia diagnoses typically do not really realize their level of care need. And the families often don't realize their level of care need until some terrible occurrence, the person falls down, something happens. People with a dementia process have a cognitive impairment, so they don't really understand. And they have this wonderful ability to only remember the good things. That's what I say. It's a blessed memory. Oh, I can take down my curtains. I've always taken down my curtains.
Right.
Get up on that ladder. Oh, I can shower, no problem. Oh, yes, I shower by myself. Oh, I can get to the bathroom, no problem at all. Meanwhile, the family's saying, oh my gosh, person's incontinent, the person is not able to make food for themselves anymore. They're not following through on eating. They're eating the wrong kinds of food. They need help with ambulation. There's all kinds of issues that come up and which affect their quality of life enormously and which they need help with. And if we can focus in and really understand what those ADL needs are, then we can help with that home care assessment, okay? Because that first level assessment where we're gonna focus in and talk about, this is what they really need help with. Yes, mom, you're great with, going to the bathroom, but it's really helpful when you wear a pull-up or something else, because getting there on time is not so easy all the time. So you're letting them know, you're letting that nurse know right off the bat, there's issues with incontinence. That's an ADL issue that we really have to be aware of. Yes, mom, you do great with getting up and going and going to the kitchen. However, sometimes you're a little unstable, and I know you don't like to use that walker, mom. So again, we're identifying an ambulation issue, a gait issue, and stability issue that requires some level of assistance. And please keep in mind, what we always need to remember with these assessments is to try to focus in on assistance, not just oversight and supervision, okay? That's the difference between getting services, more services, or not being able to access services, okay? So we wanna identify those ADLs: incontinence, locomotion or ambulation, eating and drinking, fluids, trying to think of, those are the main the basic three, although I know that I'm forgetting something right now. But those are the ones I really like to focus in on. How stable is this person, right? And is that person going to be able to get their needs known? So a lot of times, that UAS is going to go into, can the person use the telephone? Can they call for help? Can they use a personal emergency response system? So they're going to be looking at that, because someone might say, oh yeah, I can do that. And meanwhile, the son or daughter says, Mom, you don't remember to wear it. You leave it, you don't take it with you. You leave it in the room. It's not working for us, Mom. That's not helpful, and we're concerned about you. We don't want you to get hurt. Safety is a very big issue, but safety has to be looked at through activities of daily living and assistance, not just an overall umbrella of that supervision and oversight piece. The only time the supervision and oversight piece is looked at is the next step of the process. After we do that universal assessment and someone says, okay, that nurse says right away, you require home care services, then we have to determine what we're going to do, how are we going to access those services? And that's through a managed long-term care program, or something called the waiver program, the nursing home transition diversion program. So the managed long-term care program is typically what people are encouraged to go and get an assessment through. So now you've done your first 3-hour assessment, and now you're going to go to your next 1 to 2 hour assessment. You're going to talk with MLTCs, and there are multiple MLTCs in New York State. All is not equal, even though they're all using exactly the same assessment form. It's amazing. They will offer patients from 4 to 6 hours. Now that's a significant amount of difference, right? 4 to 6 hours a day, and yet it's the same assessment form. Different nurse, different company, same assessment. How does that work? Whereas if we went with that waiver program, the waiver program really understands the need for supervision and oversight based on the fact that you have to have a cognitive decline. You have to have a dementia process or identify some cognitive decline due to aging, which is fine. Now, that's fine for me and that's fine for you, but some patients are very resistant to acknowledging, right? Cognitive decline.
Absolutely.
So I have had, on many occasions, I've had to say to people, I appreciate how bright you are. I appreciate how wonderful you are, how much you want to be independent. However, people have the best quality of life, learn how to balance getting help, their needs assisted, and letting themselves be the director. That's what I say. You take over, you direct, but let someone else help you with it. Because this way, if you're telling someone to take the curtain down for you, then that ladder ready to fall down, right? If you ask someone to, I want to shower now, and they don't, it's very helpful if you need real assistance in the shower, because again, we try to look at assistance for those managed long-term care companies. So we try to focus in on what kind of assistance is needed for showering. However, I do try to still say whatever you can be independent with, that's good too. So we're going to try to balance these things out. And that's a very important issue.
Absolutely. For all these questions, I think, and you raised the point, the patient themselves, it's hard to either look at yourself, or you may not even know, particularly with patients who have dementia, they don't know what they can or cannot do. They think, and I think for loved ones, particularly in the cases, again, because I've seen with older spouses and how it's hard for one spouse to see the other spouse and really admit there is a problem. He or she can't drive anymore. They shouldn't be going up on the ladder to clean out the gutters, all these kind of questions. And so what do you recommend as far as there, or who should be there for this assessment process to help make sure that the reality really is getting out. For example, if a spouse might not want to admit to him or herself this is a problem, should a child also be there? Who can or cannot be there during this process?
Yes. So anyone the patient agrees to have there can be there during the process. I strongly recommend that the person, the child or close friend, whoever it is that's very involved with that person, be there to help, to clarify what the person might be saying versus what some of the reality is that's going on. So you asked a couple of questions though there, Eric. So part of it is also, how do we address it before we even get to all of this? You know, can we talk with that individual to begin with before we start this process, or while we're in the this part? And I think it's very important for the family to talk with each other. You can talk with the family doctor as well. You can talk with experts like myself. You can sit and talk with families about what's going on, what is concerning you at this point, and is there something concerning the individual? A lot of times that family member may not want to tell the children what's going on. They're going to cover up and say, oh no, everything's fine for the kids. But if they're in a room alone with me, I will often hear, gee, things just aren't going the way they were, but I don't want to upset my kids. I don't want to worry anybody. And so that's actually a beautiful way for me to say, see, everybody's saying the same thing. You're just not communicating. And the more that you begin to communicate, the better it will go. Because again, if we take control while we're feeling better and in control, then that's so much better. If we wait for a terrible incident to occur, then people are just stepping in and doing what they have to do and not necessarily meeting that person's needs, right? Not necessarily supporting them in the way they'd like to be supported. So I also always suggest to people, think about getting some help in the house before you need personal care help, before you need that Medicaid piece, you know? It's really nice if someone knows you and knows who you are, and that person has helped you with the cleaning around the house and the cooking and those kinds of things. Because if you don't have that spouse, or you don't live with a close family member, how's that person going to get to know you,
Right.
right? And if you have cognitive deficits, you may not be able to say to the person, this is the kind of food I really like to eat. This is my preferences. So isn't it better if we can get some of that happening prior to a major occurrence? Right?
Exactly. Absolutely right. Again, it is communication planning, going back to, what Frank and I were speaking about earlier.
That's
So one of
right.
the questions here, talk about the way situations can change. So if somebody does get Medicaid, they qualify, they're getting their in-home care, and
Mhm.
then the situation starts to deteriorate, get worse, or they develop other illnesses, conditions where they might need to now transition to a nursing home. How does that process work? Who really knows, wow, this now needs to move on, and then how does that get assessed and happen?
All right. So I'm reluctant to leap to a nursing home if I can help that person stay home. And there are many ways to help a person stay home. Okay, again, there's that managed long-term care program, which you can go back to and say, look, mom, dad, they've changed. They're not able to get up out of the chair anymore. They can't help themselves anymore. We need you to come back and do another assessment and look at this more closely. And so they are responsible to do that. They are also, though, extremely reluctant to give more hours. Understand that this is an insurance company. So the less they give you, the more they get to keep. So that's their preference. However, there's ways that you can address that, of course, right? You can say, if they deny wanting to give you more hours, then you can go to their medical director, request it there. If that level is rejected, then you can go to something called a fair hearing, and you can go to before a judge and present your information. And you'd want to have a doctor's information, medical information with you to prove that there's some changes. and what those changes are and why that's needed. Many people will bring an attorney with them because the attorney knows how to navigate that system better. Often when you go to a fair hearing, it's been that people will walk away with the hours that they've requested because the judge is not looking at the bottom line. They're looking at what's the best care, right? What's the best care for the person?
Exactly.
Right? So that's one approach, is the requesting MLTC to do that. The other approach is also to apply for the Nursing Home Transition Diversion Program, which is the waiver program, that other arm of Medicaid, okay, as soon as you can, because it can take 3 to 6 months to get on the waiver program. And managed long-term care, as soon as you get approved by Medicaid, you get your initial assessment done. You have your assessments done by your MLTCs. You agree to an MLTC. As long as it's done by the 20th of the month, then the first of the following month, you'll get those hours in place. Okay. Unhappily, with the waiver program, it's a much more complex program. It takes much more time to get in place, but once it's in place, it's a wonderfully supportive program, because they're there to help the person, not just with their physical concerns, but also with that oversight and supervision. And there are always going to be changes, Eric, right? We know that. There's always going to be changes. Now, we can also, once someone is on Medicaid, the Managed Long-Term Care Program or the Nhtd program, we can also get something called Hospice Care in, right? And Hospice Care is another Medicare program that offers care at home or care in a facility. So it can be one or the other. Medicaid would pay for the bed. Medicare would pay for hospice. So you can be in a facility, and there are beds, and different hospices have different places that they have beds available, or you can be at home. And of course, hospice was created for home care. So there really is a lot of support there. Now, what they don't have is the amount of aid hours that you would think, gee, of course people need 24/7 care if they're dying. That's what, right? That's what hospice really means. It's a dying process. But unhappily, Medicare does not really offer that. So that's why best to be on your Medicaid first, then your hours can get increased much more readily. Then you're going to have a managed long-term care program that's going to be much more responsive to you, or of course, the waiver program, which is definitely responsive. Now, if you have to go into a nursing home, is because I really need 2 people to assist me all the time, or I'm fighting the care so much that I can't let that person take care of me. I need more specialized care. That's why a nursing home can be helpful for long-term care. It can be helpful with hospice, and it can be helpful with long-term care, and they do something called palliative care, which is really hospice care, but Medicaid will continue to cover you in a nursing home for long-term care into palliative care. It's just another umbrella. Okay, so different umbrellas. So I do like people to consider that nursing homes are not the worst place to ever go, because keep in mind at home, what happens at home for individuals who are beginning to have less and less abilities. They're seeing the aides that come in the house, maybe some professionals at times, and if there's family, wonderful, those family visitors, but that's pretty much it. In a facility, you have activities going on. Again, you have many more opportunities for interaction in a facility versus what happens at home. So as much as we as Americans want so much to be at home only, it's not always the best. In fact, that's why places like assisted livings have popped up, right? Over the last 10 years, we've seen an enormous growth in that area. Why? Because people need more care and they need the social interaction. And that's not provided through the managed long-term care programs. It can be provided a little bit more through the waiver program. The waiver program might say, okay, this person can use more interactions. Maybe we can look at a day program for them, or we can look at someone coming in and working with them a little bit more. It's still not, though, the same degree that what you would get in a facility, right? Where that's what they're geared towards. They are geared towards this long-term care, providing the care, and then as changes occur, responding to those changes, including if there's a change in your abilities, and they'll give you physical therapy again, they'll give you occupational therapy again, speech therapy, change in diet, whatever is needed based on that change in the medical status.
And that's really where I think it comes again to not only, again, the communication planning, but having a team around you of medical experts, legal experts, financial experts. Exactly right. Really, who can help ask the right questions and help you realize that you don't know what you don't know, or what your options are, and once you get there, how to balance all of those things and really keep the process moving forward, because it is evolutionary. Like you said, the one constant we have is change. That's it.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much for all your help, for all your insights. This has been a fabulous talk today. I know our audience out there has gotten a tremendous amount out of this. I know they've had their pens and pencils and iPads out and taking notes, but again, you are always available. If people really want more information, they can, I want Medicaid planning or the application process or any of this, they can contact Family Care Connections at 516-248-9323 and visit you online, of course, at familycareconnections.com. I want to thank you again. I would like to thank Frank for all of his insights, his commentary, again, all the information he gave. Anne-Marie, thank you so much. Again, the passion that you guys bring and the sense of caring and empathy, I think that really is at the foundation of this whole process for everything. So again, thank you so much for sponsoring today's webinar. Thank you to everyone for everything they all do, not just the two of you there at Family Care Connections. I want to thank our audience out there, the hundreds of you who sent in questions that informed so much of this conversation today. Thank you so much. You can view this webinar again. It's not over. You can view this many, many times over, as much as you like, at richnerlive.com. You can visit us every day for news, information, updates about everything happening in our communities at liherald.com. And it's election season, so not just getting out and voting for your elected officials, but voting for the best businesses in Nassau and Suffolk counties. We do have the best of everything here on Long Island. In the Long Island Choice Awards, you can vote every day through November 12th at lichoiceawards.com. Again, thank you all so much, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay, so I can close it. So how was that? I thought I was all over the place. I was okay. Good. Really? Oh my